Hello, woman beings. I hope that you are enjoying your summer. We are here to record a super special bonus episode on the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We couldn't help ourselves. We felt that we had to just come on and talk about it. And we look forward to having discourse with you and each other in just a minute. This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
and have the freedom to change our minds.
Without expectation or judgment,
we will hold a safe space and support each other
as we navigate together in the form of feminine.
So like I said, we are here out of summer hibernation to talk about the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which we just felt was really important. But before we get into that, I wanted to introduce my lovely co-hosts, Emma.
Hello, woman beings.
And Kellyanne.
Hello, good to be here.
It is great to have you both here with me.
Thank you,
It feels
Kelly.
good to be recording in the studio again.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here today. I do wish that it were under happier circumstances.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But this topic affects all women. And so this is something that we really wanted to dig into. We've actually kind of been avoiding the topic of abortion for a while now. And this just really felt like the right timing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, we had you, the woman beings, submit questions, concerns, feelings, reactions to the news on our Instagram. And so that's just a quick reminder for anyone that doesn't follow us on Instagram. We're having great conversations and great interactions. So that's at Woman Being Podcast.
Yeah, you want to be there because I'm really excited about some of the content we're going to be coming out with on Instagram.
I'm very excited. And season 3 is just a minute away. So
just around the corner.
just
around the riverbend.
Exactly. I'm glad I was going in that direction and you guys went there as well.
Wow, so in sync.
Yes. We are one.
And so I guess to start, we're going to read off some of these reactions that we've had.
Yeah.
And talk about them. So, number 1, finding myself on team #NoKid.
Mm-hmm.
I can empathize with that.
Yeah, it's a little fatalistic, but
Yeah, it's kind of... it's sort of like, what am I bringing my children into? What sort of world? And I think that's very, very relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Response number 2, it's fucked. I feel that. Have any Netflix recommendations? We will get into that, actually. At the end of the episode, we share resources. So stay tuned.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have any Netflix recommendations specifically. I can't promise that. But we do have recommendations.
Yeah.
Feeling very conflicted. It's a huge injustice. I hope they start working on the foster care system. Feels like women have to take the responsibility of men's choices, and that is frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, it definitely feels like sort of a overarching policy that criminalizes one thing, but doesn't address like the actual issues that are preventing women from being able to have happy, healthy pregnancies and to raise children in this world.
Yeah.
And
Options.
yes. Options.
I totally agree with you. And that's something I've kind of bitched about for like years at this point is like our foster care system's broken. So I can't tell you how much I agree with that.
Yeah. And we've actually talked about the foster care system. We had an early episode in season 1.
Yeah.
We probably should talk about it again with Chloe Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
And she came on and talked about organizing volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
She worked there with one of our local foster care organizations in Shasta County. So if you want to check that out, feel free.
Mm-hmm.
And then next one, I wish this one really hits me. And I think this resonates with a lot of people right now. But this person said, I wish I could trust the church, that's in quotations, church, in these times to step up and care for those who need it, but I know they won't. It breaks my heart and infuriates me.
Yep.
Just sort of, yep. That doesn't speak for all churches. I know there's lots of faith leaders out there that have responded and are responding, but I think the vast majority is just sitting ducks. My heart breaks for all the people this will negatively impact. The poor, the marginalized, the young. It's something to grieve. And then lastly, are you pro-choice or pro-life? Well, that's a fantastic question. We'll get into that. But first, I wanted to just start from the beginning. And the beginning meaning earlier this summer. What was your reaction to Roe versus Wade being overturned, and how have you been doing?
Yeah, I remember it literally still so clearly. Like, I woke up late. I think it was a Thursday that the news broke. And I rushed. Normally, I like read through news articles, so I'm like familiar with what's going on in the morning. But that didn't happen that day. And I got to work and my husband texted me and was like, hey, did you see that Roe versus Wade was overturned? And I was really shocked and really bummed. And it felt like I was moving in slow motion all day. Like, that's how it felt. And I remember a friend actually reached out to me and he was like, hey, I'm super sorry that your rights were taken away today. And it like really hit me because my brain went, I have to go protest and advocate for women. It didn't.
But not necessarily for yourself.
Yeah, not necessarily for me. And so I really had to sit in that and process. And I think, yeah, it makes me very uncertain of where we are going, especially with other policies that could be in question now as well. So not doing very great around that, if that answers the question.
I was in Turkey when Roe v. Wade was overturned, but I was not shocked because, I mean, our court has been being stacked in this direction for years, and the anti-choice movement has been pushing for this so hard for so long and making these little steps that have led to it that it didn't feel shocking, but it was definitely disappointing. And I was angry. So I was angry texting my mom. As my mom, who you guys have met because she was on an episode of the podcast.
Another plug.
Yes, you should listen to her episode about women in government. She works for the South Carolina state government. And so I was texting her about it, and we were sort of angrily texting back and forth to each other. And she was telling me how South Carolina is working very hard to implement more and more laws that essentially ban abortion in the state. And so yeah, I was angry, but also was like on vacation. So trying to also just like, didn't feel like I could fully process it at the time. But I've been overall, I feel like just trying to listen to people. I've heard things that are hopeful and things that are also not very hopeful. But overall, not super happy.
Yeah, I resonate with all of those things. I remember the morning I hopped on Instagram and saw the news article about it. I texted my husband and I was like, Roe v. Wade was just overturned. And he responded, fuck. And that sort of kind of summed up the kind of feeling that we had. It sort of felt like a very hopeless situation. And I think I've been on quite the journey of my relationship to the topic of abortion. And so it felt like I'd kind of finally come to a place that I was comfortable with in my understanding of the laws and how it works, et cetera. And then it changed drastically and to me, a very scary way. So I spent several days, I would say like at least 3 or 4 days kind of doom scrolling through Instagram or Reddit or whatever, and just like reading people's reactions to it, things that people were resharing. And there's just a lot of lack of hope and devastation and concern and frustration. And I just felt all the feels. But it was weird because I had to go to work that day. And so I'm like at work and I'm like feeling all these feelings. But abortion is such a taboo topic that you can't like talk about that. And so
especially in our work environment.
Yeah, especially in our work environment, which is generally more conservative and more Christian. So it sort of felt like I kind of had to suffer in silence. But my husband and other friends and you guys or whatever have been amazing to process with. It definitely was very depressed for a few days. And I'd say now I'm still frustrated about the situation, but in terms of like my feelings and my mental health, I feel like I'm doing pretty well. So I think it serves to acknowledge that all of us came from Christian evangelical backgrounds, which typically aligns with a pro-life or anti-choice viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So in that, we are constantly evolving and changing and learning and growing. And so what has been your process of coming from the maybe more pro-life or conservative Christian viewpoint to now?
Mm-hmm.
What has that been like for you?
Yeah, it has been probably one of the least dramatic journeys that I've been on, shockingly, of deconstruction and realigning my political beliefs and whatnot. But I mean, it was just kind of, it wasn't necessarily talked about as a growing up, but it was definitely like understood, like abortion's wrong. Like if you get pregnant, like that's on you, like figure it out, basically. And that there are great options like the foster care system, and Christians are great because they adopt people out of the foster care system or kids out of the foster care system. And so we're solving the problem, basically, was kind of like how I understood it. But when I moved away to ministry school at 18, that was kind of the thing that I'm like, this doesn't actually make sense. Like, no one actually can give me a good argument as to why this is wrong. And I wasn't openly supportive of being pro-choice, but I wasn't openly supportive of like the opposite, if that makes sense. So it was actually when I was 22 and out of ministry school that I had a friend who got pregnant and had an abortion. And I remember her sitting there and telling me, and I just like, the little piece of Christian in me that still existed was like, hey, like, there's actually nothing you can do for that baby. It's your job actually to take care of your friend. And I think it was that moment for me that was like, this is like not, like, I actually don't align with women being like forced to be moms, basically, because life happens, birth control fails, people get assaulted, all those things. And it was really that moment, from that moment on. And then I started to kind of learn a little bit more policy, a little bit more ethics and things like that. But it was never really like, for me, it wasn't like a big struggle for some reason, because I feel like it is for a lot of people. And I think it's rightly so. It's a very heavy, weighty topic. And it's complicated. Like, it's not simple. But it started for me with a friend that needed one. And that ever since, it was just like, okay, I get this. So,
Totally.
yeah.
Wow. I feel like my answer is going to be much more drawn out than yours.
That's totally fair. It's your story.
Tell us your truth, Emma.
Gosh, gross. No, I refuse. No, but I grew up, you guys have heard about it on the podcast through various different episodes, but I come from a more secular, liberal upbringing and then converted into Christianity in high school. And I didn't really have an opinion on abortion before that. It wasn't like a household topic or something when I was in like elementary school and middle school. But I sort of just like absorbed the like pro-life ethos as my church like sometimes talked about it, but it really wasn't like a big thing that was harped on at my church. It was just like, yeah, we're pro-life because that's what the Bible says, or that's what Christians are, so that's just what we are. And I was very pro-life with like no caveats, like there's no exceptions essentially, and that's that, because like we're not God. That was sort of my logic. But I wasn't, it was not something I even really talked to people about very much because there was no reason to. And then like, as I got older, I got more and more interested in politics, like in college, and started to align myself with like the Pro-Life Democrats organization. So they are Democrats who are pro-life, in case that wasn't enough explanation. But I was like, oh, okay, this is great. These are people that have that pro-life aspect, but also are falling in line with all my other beliefs, which are to provide, healthcare and to give education to people and to advocate on behalf of women and people of color and all those different things. I was like, great, that's what I want. And I took in a lot of content from scholars who talked about the idea of like a holistic life ethic. So it's the idea that you are pro-life, anti-war, anti-death penalty, pro-healthcare, pro-education, like all these things that are like, these are all things that like encourage life as opposed to death, essentially. But my, like, I feel like part of it was actually as sort of my like sexual ethic and purity culture deconstructing was happening. I can't help but recognize that that is actually intertwined with the pro-life movement. This like shame and guilt that's associated with purity culture and with being pure is just so linked to the pro-life movement. And as I broke those things down, that started to, I think, weaken that pro-life ethos that I was following behind. And I also feel like I walked in the idea that like, well, if we are meant to, you know, be abstinent until marriage and we are meant to like remain pure, if everyone just did that, then abortion wouldn't be an issue. Mm-hmm. Like everyone should fall in line
very much a thing.
With, everyone should fall in line with my moral code. Mm-hmm. And then as I started to be like, oh, actually, I don't think that I have the right to implement my moral code onto other people. Like that's actually wrong. Mm-hmm. And we actually have a better society when we don't put our moral code onto people in that way. And so I started to break those things down, and that started to, I think, weaken it as well. Last year, SB 8 was passed, which was the Texas abortion law that essentially allowed for citizens to sue people for having abortions in Texas. And when that was passed, I started listening to a lot of content around women's stories and women's abortion stories, and the stories of women who were driving 8 hours to Oklahoma to get an abortion, and the clinics that were just flooded with women. And I listened to their stories and I got very emotional. I was like crying, listening to their stories, and I felt almost guilty because I felt empathy for them. And I was like, that was like a cataclysmic moment for me, because it was like, okay, if I'm feeling so much empathy for these women, then like maybe I should be rethinking the way that I think about abortion. Like, why am I having this kind of reaction to this? And like recognizing that these women were coming from a place that I just hadn't fully considered because I hadn't been confronted with it. And so I started, like, that was like the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to educate myself more, and I'm going to listen more, and I'm going to seek out more information and understanding about this. And so I basically started just like learning a ton of statistics about this. Like one of the things that shocked me is that I think it's like 60% of abortions happen or are sought by women who are already parents. And and I'm like, okay, so like there's this idea, I think, that women, it's like just these like single women that are like running around like whoring themselves out or whatever, and they're like, and so they're dumb, and so they're getting pregnant and whatever, but 60% of those women are already parents. Mm-hmm. And then there's also like a huge chunk of, I mean, 1 in 4 women have abortions, period. Like, you probably know someone who's had an abortion. It would be shocking if you don't. Mm-hmm. And so realizing that, and it's like, oh, like, these are not, you know, evil people that are getting abortions. Mm-hmm. And then also learning about how abortions affect people who are in poverty, like, or people of color or indigenous people. Like, abortion bans don't actually, they aren't actually bans on abortion for all people. They're bans on abortion for people who can afford it. Because people who can't afford it, who have well-paying jobs, who have higher education, can take the time off, can have the resources to access abortion care, even if it is illegal, have the resources to travel out of state, all those things. And then also the people who don't have that kind of access are the people who are going to be even more affected from being prevented from getting an abortion and are going to wind up with a human that they've brought into the world that's not able to be cared for because they don't have the means, which is actually a huge reason why a lot of people get an abortion, is because there's not the means to do it and they're trying to be responsible. And so I was learning about that, learning about how women leaving abusive relationships or who are in abusive relationships are also seeking abortions. A large chunk of women who seek abortions are not even with the partner that they got impregnated by within 5 years after that. And so if they did have that child would wind up being in a single parent home. And that person also wouldn't be getting the same kind of support. So I'm learning all these things. And I read this book called A Complicated Choice. And it had a lot of really great points about how abortion actually aligns with religious belief. That was super valuable for me as well. One of the things that's really cool to me is the way that many different religious groups are actually aligning with the ACLU right now to work towards bringing down abortion bans and to show how that's actually infringing on their religious rights. Because in Judaism, it's actually considered necessary and lawful for a woman to get an abortion if that is going to essentially impede her quality of life to not have the abortion. It's considered perfectly okay to get an abortion for the sake of the life of the mother. And in Islam, there's nothing about abortions, and most Muslims, at least in the United States, are pro-choice. And there's actually also nothing in the Bible about abortion when it comes to the Christian faith. And in this book by Katie Zay, I think is her name. I don't know if I'm saying it properly, but A Complicated Choice, there's an interview that she does with a minister who's a Christian minister, and he talks about this idea that we actually don't have the ability to quote unquote keep a soul from entering the earth, and that an abortion is not actually a death, but it is telling a soul not yet. It's not your time to come onto this earth. And that there's actually this idea in Catholicism that so that the souls of the unborn are held by God, and that God has the power to bring those onto the earth and we don't. And so which is also in line with things the other Abrahamic faiths like Judaism and Islam that actually believe that a fetus is not a person until a certain amount of time into incubation. And so there's, or even in Judaism, they don't even name a child until 8 days after they've been born. And so this is and this child doesn't even have identity yet until 8 days later. And so there's all these things where I started learning about the statistics that actually line up with more life than the pro-life movement did or the anti-choice movement did. And I still am very committed to my faith as a Christian, and I realized first of all, in the Bible, we see God mandate death all the time. God has people kill people all the time.
All the time.
People are always dying. And I actually don't think that God is that concerned with death and with people dying. I think God's more concerned with people living compassionately and with love. And so to me, as I've like been learning and absorbing all these things, as I've also learned about all the ways that like really big Christian figures who have involved themselves in politics have spread actually misinformation about abortion. There's this idea, what is it called? You guys have probably heard of it. Called a post-abortion syndrome, which is essentially that the like trauma that happens to someone after they've had an abortion, which is invented by a Christian who didn't even have any like scientific studies that backed that up. And there have only been Christian studies on this that have said that abortion is traumatic. There's been no like actual peer-reviewed scientific studies that are secular that have been done that prove post-abortion syndrome is even a thing. So like there's stuff like that where it's like, it's infuriating. And like, it's just all brought me to recognize that there's actually nothing in the faith that I believe in that would make me be obligated or even inclined to be pro-life. Like it doesn't make sense when you think about all that the Bible says, when you think about all that comes along with leading a life of compassion. It doesn't add up to me. And so that's all very roundabout way of saying that, like, that's sort of been my process in very slowly, incrementally over, like, my lifetime. But in the past, like, year, it's been very ramped up as I, like, opened myself back up to saying, like, maybe this like, default that I had sort of had that I hadn't really thought about isn't the right way. Maybe I should, make educated decisions.
Well, yeah, and I think that's such a big piece of it is I hear in your story, very similar to mine, there's kind of just sort of like one rhetoric that we're taught in evangelical upbringings about abortion and about the personhood of a fetus, essentially. And you're basically told it's a person, and if you kill them, that's murder, period. Yeah. And I think for me, like, understanding the wider reach of the ethics of abortion and the wider reach of the research on abortion and like there's so many more considerations to be made than just like point blank deciding that is a person and to kill them is murder, period. So if anything, I hope that as I go into my story, dun dun dun,
dun dun dun, buckle up, people.
that can become clear because I was very zealous and very passionate about abortion and being pro-life. It led me to actually volunteer at a crisis pregnancy center.
A crisis pregnancy center?
Which I don't know if this is true for all crisis pregnancy centers, but the one that I was a part of was essentially just volunteers convincing people not to have abortions. It did not offer any practical help other than to refer people to other crisis pregnancy centers that maybe could give them an ultrasound or give them an ultrasound so that they'd see the baby and then feel guilty about having an abortion so that they wouldn't, kind of like coercing people into not going that direction. And while I was there, I mean, many things stuck out to me. Mainly, I was not educated. I was 18, 19 years old trying to help women in their 20s and 30s help them like make decisions about their future and about the future of their unborn child. So that, and not just me, all of the volunteers at the crisis center were all uneducated and I think really well-intentioned. I think in our hearts, there was this sort of mass like genocide of humans happening and we were there to fight against it. And then I read actually Abby Johnson's book, Unplanned, which is very well known. It was made into a movie recently. And take this as you wish, but that book actually gave me so much more compassion for the pro-choice movement than necessarily. I mean, the conclusion of it definitely confirmed my pro-life beliefs at the time, but I was my eyes were opened in a sense to the fact that people who were pro-choice were not just like evil, murderous, angry people who didn't like babies, but that their goals were in alignment a lot of the times with pro-life goals. Like most people who are pro-choice want less abortions. They want women to not be forced to make hard choices like that.
Yeah.
And then I actually had a really good conversation with a gal that I went to college with. We kind of were friends for like a little while. And I mentioned like, oh, Planned Parenthood is just so bad, blah, blah, blah. I mean, we hated Planned Parenthood. Like, they are the devil in pro-life land. But she was like, well, why do you think that? And I was like, well, this and this and this and all these abortions. And I read this book by Abby Johnson and she said blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, I actually had a friend who got pregnant and Planned Parenthood provided her, like they were with her every step of the way through her pregnancy. And they provided her free health care. They did all her exams. They provided all these like, you know, prenatal things that you need and you can't necessarily get if you don't have health insurance or if you can't afford it. And Planned Parenthood walked with her all the way through birth. And so that led me on the journey of, well, Planned Parenthood's not the devil because the crisis pregnancy centers that I know don't do any of that. They do like, you know, counseling by volunteers who are not qualified to counsel, and they do maybe if you're lucky, you can get, oh my gosh, what's the word? Ultrasounds. And sometimes a little bit more, but usually they don't have full-time doctors on set. They just have like doctors who volunteer their time. Anyway, so that led me on this whole thing of like, we can't defund Planned Parenthood. We need to fund Planned Parenthood, but still get rid of abortion. And that had kind of been my perspective for a long time, is I was like, states with more access to abortion actually have lower abortion rates because they provide other resources that allow women to not have to have an abortion, like medical care and contraception and other things. And so I kind of was led into kind of a middle ground that I called it sort of a middle ground where I was like, I don't know if just banning abortion is really helping. We really need to support these women and provide other resources, make adoption possible, make the foster care system work, etc. And that was kind of like the extent of my knowledge. I do think that it was really beneficial in my thought process and my growth. But as I was still firmly rooted in evangelical Christian tradition at that time, I don't think that being anything but pro-life was an option for me. So it wasn't in my realm of possibilities that you kind of have to be against abortion in general. And I think that's very common. And I think this is my main point. I've already said this, but I just knew abortion is murder. And unborn fetus is a person, and to kill them is murder. It doesn't matter that you have free choice or not. Like, you don't get to murder anybody else for any reason. So unborn are the same way. And I would say now in the last several years, as I have been going through a process of deconstruction, my mind has been open to an entire other realm of ethics, ethos, reasons that women should be allowed to have control over their choices that aren't just like my body, my choice. I think that I kind of hate that, like, is the sort of slogan, it feels like, or like one of the most common slogans of the pro-choice movement, because I don't think that it encapsulates enough of what someone would need to really understand the pro-choice movement, because it doesn't matter if it's your body and it's your choice if you're murdering someone, right? So, anyways, all that being said, a lot of things that Emma has brought up are considerations for me. But I think also there is a big question, which is a matter of medical ethics, which is that no person can be forced or required to donate blood or give a kidney. Even dead bodies, you cannot take organs, even if it could save someone else's life, without someone's consent. And so there's a matter of medical ethics, I think, that needs to be considered, in that no person is forced to provide life-saving measures from their personal body source unless voluntarily in other situations. And so in the case of pregnancy, I mean, that is an even more extreme case of like donating, right? Like, it's 9 months of your life. It's one of the most painful experiences in human existence, or a very invasive surgery, like, to bring life forth into the world. And so to require women and force them to donate that part of themselves, I suppose, is like a rough way of saying it. Feels wrong to me. And then beyond that, I think there's the question of personhood. I don't think it's fair to just decide 12 weeks or conception or 28 or, whatever the range may be, to decide like at this point in time, a person has a soul. Mm-hmm. There's actually so many more questions around that. I think like the minute you try and define like this sort of like existence of a soul or this existence of someone as a person, it gets very complicated and just creates more and more questions.
Yeah. I mean, you're taking the philosophical idea of a soul and applying that to law, which is kind of bizarre.
Yes, exactly. Like, and that is the thing about laws. Laws have to be very structured. They have to be clear. They have to be concise. And so to apply a very clear and concise, solid decision to something that is so questionable from a religious viewpoint, from a scientific viewpoint, like you just go down the list. There's many, many questions there about when a person becomes a person. So in that sense, to have one single viewpoint, meaning evangelical Christianity, conservative right, decide this is the moment, that, well, first of all, just excludes like the majority of America in having any choice in the matter. And also is not necessarily founded in any of those other considerations that need to be made when you're trying to determine that. And so all that is just to point out that the ethics of abortion, the question of personhood, is so much more expansive than I think I was raised with. Oh, definitely more expansive than I was raised with. But I think most evangelical Christians are given. And then especially when you get into the realm of like fetuses that are destined to die because they have like horrible genetic deformities, or like women whose lives are at risk, or like, I mean, you could go down the list. That, and even like the question of, yes, I could carry this child into the world. They'll probably die a few months later, but they will be in immense pain. Like things like that. I feel like that choice, I think, only belongs to someone who's intimately aware. It's between a woman and her doctor to make those choices that are very hard and very heartbreaking and go beyond just the matter of like, should I murder this person or not because it's convenient for my life or because it's my choice, period. There's a lot of things to be thought about there. So I would hate for government organizations, period, to have a say in those very, very complicated, difficult, traumatic, and heartbreaking situations. So anyways, that's just me rambling.
Well, I mean, it actually makes me think of something that Katie Zay says in her book, which is this idea that it's actually okay to recognize that there's grief associated with abortion.
Absolutely.
One of the criticisms that she has of the pro-choice movement is the idea that there is one abortion story, and that's it. And we can't reveal that there's ever, that it's ever a complicated choice, per the name of her book, because then that, in their mind, weakens the argument for pro-choice.
Yeah.
But her argument is that it actually strengthens the pro-choice argument because it recognizes that women are taking all these things into consideration when considering an abortion, and also that anything that is a large life decision or transition requires grieving.
Yes.
That's one of the people who study grief and who study the way that it affects you have been advocating for a more expansive view on grief, because at least in our Western society, we tend to not confront grief, and we think grief is bad, period. End of story. If you're grieving something, then there's something wrong, or you can only grieve for a certain amount of time, or there's only specific things that you can grieve, and other things are not acceptable to grieve. And so a lot of the stories and the women that she interviews in her book talk about how they felt grief after their abortion, but that didn't mean that they felt regret. That those things actually don't have to come hand in hand, and that they can feel grief for all sorts of reasons, whether it's because of ways like that they had been told that that abortion should work for their entire life, if they were raised in a group that was very anti-abortion. It can also come from grieving that they they've realized that they shouldn't be with the partner that they're with because they're like, I can't have a child with this person. Or they're grieving because, sure, maybe they would want a child, but it's just that's not possible right now because of because their life is at risk, or because the child's life is at risk, or because X, what, like insert reason here. Like, and, I think that's really powerful to recognize the complexity of the issue. Instead of just saying blanket, there is one way that this works.
I completely agree. And I think it discounts so many other women's stories by saying it's cut and dry.
Yeah. Like, and you keep them out of the movement.
Exactly. And it's just not. It's not cut and dry, and it's not simple. And I think that's okay. And I think that's actually empowering to these women. For example, someone that I grew up with had, I forget the kind of pregnancy it is.
Ectopic?
That one. And actually had to have an abortion to save her life.
Yeah.
I am so glad that my childhood friend is alive because she got an abortion. Like, that is phenomenal. Not to water down the choice. Like, I think there's a lot of value in that. And I think women know what they're choosing. And I agree with you with choosing, like, just because it's hard and it's sad and there's grief. Maybe that is the post-abortion syndrome that people talk about, is just the feelings that come in your hormones, because your hormones are crazy when you're pregnant. But, like, that doesn't mean it wasn't right.
You can grieve something, and that doesn't mean that it was a wrong decision.
Right.
Well, and I think if we take even just like emotional reactions to abortion as like our proof for why it's wrong, like that, I mean, that's just like a very soft science as it is, because postpartum depression is a consideration. Like, should a woman not have gone through that pregnancy because she's experiencing hormonal changes after giving birth? No, like that's silly. So to like deny that women who have an abortion and possibly grieve the possibility of what that could have been, grieve, you know, the hardness of having to make that decision, the trauma from having to walk through 27 protesters who think that she's committing murder. Like, there's a myriad of reasons someone might grieve or have trauma after an abortion. If we're talking thought experiment, essentially, like there's plenty of other thought experiments that kind of point to our intuitive understanding of fetuses as not quite as valuable as human life. For example, if you are in a burning building and you can save a crying baby that's right in front of you, or 5 embryos, most people, almost everyone, is going to grab the baby, right? And so there's like an intuitive piece of us that kind of values the person that's with us right now as opposed to the person that is yet to be, perhaps. But even though it's 5 lives over 1. And then there's a matter of miscarriage, which we haven't even talked about miscarriage yet, but this is a big, big issue. If we really believe that all unborn children are like people undergoing this massive genocide, they're all dying, then why, if that's really true, then why is the evangelical right not putting all of their efforts towards solving miscarriage? Because we're talking a huge percentage of babies die every year, if we're taking it from that perspective, from just natural miscarriage. And if we really think of it as the pandemic or epidemic that it is, why are we not doing anything, right? Yeah. And so I think in that there's sort of an intuitive human understanding of, okay, maybe that's not the same. Like, nobody who went through a miscarriage would ever say, I had a harder time than the person who lost a child, right? So there's pieces of that maybe not nobody, but there's pieces of that we kind of see in our lives that maybe point to, just because an unborn child may be precious to someone does not give them the same unalienable rights as someone who is born.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this is one of the things that really grinds my gears about the anti-choice conservative movement, is that consistently conservative representatives, senators, judges, etc., will refuse to bring to approve laws that give women better health care, that give assistance to single mothers, that provide free education. They refuse to do things that actually will help women who are being forced into pregnancies and motherhood. Yep. And the rhetoric that is happening right now is okay, we did it. We overturned Roe v. Wade. Now we start helping them. And the idea that there would be a condition on helping people is sick to me. Like, that it doesn't make sense. And I also don't believe them. Like, I don't believe
them either.
That there's actually going to be real, tangible assistance and aid brought to these people that are being forced into parenthood, because they historically have never provided that in a real way. They've been against that.
Despite the statistics that prove that the more provisions there are, the lower the abortion rates are.
Right. Yeah. It's so frustrating, which, like, I was always frustrated with that. And, like, that was why I had leaned towards the pro-life Democrat movement and the holistic life ethic. But that's a very small minority within the anti-choice movement. And that's also, that's just not the way that it works.
Yeah. And it's like, here's the deal, right? In a perfect world, in an absolutely perfect world, we wouldn't need abortion. Like, there would be no unwanted pregnancies. There would be happy, healthy mothers and babies, and there wouldn't be sexual assault. And, the slew of reasons that abortion, in my opinion, is very needed, but we're not there. And we can't live in this la-la land of, like, well, even if you're raped, you should have your baby. I'm like, whoa. Like, that is not your place. And I think that's what I continue to come down to is, like, it is not my choice to make a choice for another human and what is severely going to impact their life. Like, I'm sorry, the 10-year-old in Florida who has been sexually assaulted and denied an abortion from a judge, like, that actually makes me sick. And so that is what I continue to come back to is, like, I am not in their shoes. I do not understand their life circumstances. And it is their right to basically define their future.
Well, and that's one thing that really gets me is this idea of rape as an exception. Because does any woman just get to show up at an abortion clinic and say, I was raped and get an abortion? Doubtful. I'm guessing that charges have to be filed. Rape probably needs to be prosecuted.
Yep.
And by that point, she's been 3 years in the justice system and she's already had her baby and it's over. So that one to me, I'm kind of like, really? Does that really count? Because I very highly doubt that rape as an exception just means that any woman can show up to any abortion clinic and say, well, I was raped, so I want an abortion. And they're going to just let that happen. Right?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really valid because, I mean, our justice system is already so slow and so unwilling to truly prosecute rapists.
Absolutely.
So the idea that, like, if people do say, like, oh, like, well, I'll allow abortion if it is rape, or if it was sexual assault and non-consensual, et cetera, and, like, but how? How does that work?
We can't
How do you
even
prove that in any way?
Yeah.
Or can just any woman who wants an abortion walk in and say, I was raped, and then just get an abortion? Like, I doubt that that's the strategy that they're going with. They're not going to just say, well, as long as you say it, they're going to say you have to prove it.
Yeah. And I don't think believe all women is going to apply here. I just don't.
Yeah.
No.
And so that, to me, I feel like is kind of arbitrary. I mean, like, there's a lot of politicians and a lot of people in the pro-life movement who are like, no, rape is not an exception. We're not going to murder people just because you've been raped or whatever. Which, again, that's their perspective. That's not the way I would look at it. But this idea that, like, oh, yes, once we prosecuted the rape, which we currently are unable to prosecute because we have no precedent for this actually being taken care of in a just way, then you can get an abortion. And it's like, no, I don't think the possibilities of that are.
No. Yeah. I think another really interesting argument I heard recently was that the slew of things that a minor cannot do without a parent's consent, right? Like a minor cannot leave their classroom to use the bathroom without permission from a teacher.
Right.
A minor cannot leave school grounds without being checked out by a parent. A minor cannot make medical decisions by themselves without the consent of a parent. Like, there's a slew of things that minors cannot do. And then you're going to say, no, you have to have that baby. When a minor is not able to care for a child without the assistance of their parent. And it just, like, to me, I'm like, that I think that argument is really valid. I think there are many arguments across the board that are very valid, but that is one that really was like, oh yeah, that's very eye-opening. Like, for states that are like, no, even if you're a minor and you get pregnant, you have to have that baby. It's like, we're asking kids to be parents when we don't actually allow kids the autonomy to make those decisions in the first place. So yeah, there's a list of reasons.
I mean, which is not to say that kids should have the autonomy to do all those things.
Totally.
Kids should also not be expected to raise another kid.
No.
Like, that it just doesn't make sense. Like, we have laws around things that children are allowed to do because they're developing. It's for their good, essentially, is why the things default to their parents. But then there's the idea that a 13-year-old might need to raise a child it's insane when you think about it from that frame of reference.
Well, and circling back to miscarriage, because I think this is very important to talk about, because again, if we're going to define unborn children or fetuses as humans with unalienable rights protected by the Constitution, that puts women at risk for being pregnant at all. Because as I think it's 1 in 4, 1 in 5 women undergo miscarriage, or 25% of pregnancies end in miscarriage, or one of those two. I'm not really sure what the statistic is exactly. Look it up.
I feel like I've heard 1 in 40.
1 in 40.
Whoa, no, it's way more than that.
Well, fact check us, people, because I'm not sure of the exact statistic. I just know it's a very high amount. There's a very high number of miscarriages, and it puts women at risk for being charged for murder because their child died. There's a case in Missouri right now of a woman who's she's on trial for child endangerment or putting her child at risk because
she had a miscarriage.
Because she had a miscarriage after her husband or significant other beat her up. And she's being charged for putting that child at risk. So essentially, I mean, let's just say that extreme becomes the norm. Like, women are at risk for being pregnant at all, and they cannot go anywhere. They have to be careful about what they eat. Like, they can't have coffee.
Can't have fish.
Yeah.
No.
And there's
or sushi, I guess I should say.
And there's any number of things that might cause a miscarriage or could possibly affect miscarriage, which at this point is still not very researched.
Right.
And there's not a lot of information about. And or maybe she drank alcohol before she knew that she was pregnant, or any number of things.
All kinds
Suddenly
of
women are
things.
culpable for that. And that just takes us back to biblical times where you could just die because your child didn't live or something like that. And that
100%.
that's terrifying to me.
I did do a quick Google. There's a lot of different statistics, but the one I see the most is 10 to 20% of women will miscarry, which is still
it's a high percentage.
Very significant amount.
That's 1 in 5.
I think also, though, my sister, who's in nursing school, almost done with nursing school, clarified this for me. And it is that actually there is elective abortion and spontaneous abortion. We just call abortion the procedure where a fetus is removed from the uterus, but a miscarriage is technically an abortion. It's just not one you elected to. And so I think people kind of destigmatizing that word. I know it's really hard when it's referenced to as a medical procedure, but it's it's literally just the removal of a fetus is what that means.
Yeah, because abortive care is given to a woman who miscarries and to a woman who chooses to abort their pregnancy. So there's things like a DNC, which clears out any like extra tissue that's inside of your uterus. Women who have never even been pregnant might need a D&C, but it's also considered abortive care because it is how you clear out the tissue and the matter that is left behind after an abortion or after a miscarriage, or just because you have some weird stuff going on with your uterine lining. I have a friend who's had to have a D&C, not because of pregnancy at all, but because she had uterine lining buildup because her hymen was like blocking her uterine lining from properly being ejected every month.
Dang,
so
girl.
like things like that happen, and like it actually has nothing to do with abortion, quote unquote, as we think about it, elective abortion.
Yeah.
But it is medical care that's very necessary, that's essential, that is amazing that women have access to. And the thing is that regulating abortive care like this also puts those women at risk.
100%. And I mean, yeah, I think of all the women that I know that have benefited from things like that. And it's very scary to me to think that these women will severely suffer from this decision. And I mean, women everywhere are going to severely suffer, right? It's not one group of women. There will be varying degrees and in different ways, but it will impact all women.
Well, I think that's actually an important point that you bring up, is this idea that like varying degrees of affectedness will happen. And I think of myself, if I were to spontaneously get pregnant unplanned right now, I have
Spontaneous pregnancy.
I don't know how it
Spontaneously
happens.
makes
I don't
it
know how that
sound,
happens.
just
Makes
makes
a
it
little
sound like
zap.
it's immaculate
Yeah,
or
sort of like,
something.
if the Lord touched me and I became pregnant. Well, there's a lot of things in play. Number one, I'm married and I have a stable living situation. I have the finances to bring a child into the world. And, oh my gosh, there's probably other things that I have. But I have an immense amount of privilege that allows me to
You're white. Oh, no.
carry an unplanned pregnancy at this point in my life. But when I was, 19 and I was in college and my period was a day late, the terror that I felt was so immense. And so I think that really needs to be taken into consideration, as a lot of the women who are on the side of the pro-life movement have that level of privilege that they can bring a child into the world. I mean, yeah, it's going to be difficult or expensive or like, whatever, but they have means. And so I think considering my, status in life in comparison to my perspective on like how I feel about an unborn child in my womb is like a very important piece of the puzzle that needs to be talked about because we're not the ones who are going to be negatively affected.
Yeah. Well, and if you're talking about degrees of being affected, another group that I think about a lot is trans men. Trans men can get pregnant. And I've heard stories, or I heard one particular story about a trans man who was told he could not get pregnant because of the hormones that he had been taking, because he had been in the process of transitioning from his female body into the male body that he wanted and that fit for him. And his partner got him pregnant. And I'm pretty sure that in the story that I heard, he was able to get abortive care in that situation. But imagine the trauma that comes with also, while transitioning away from this female body, getting pregnant and having to experience all that comes with that as a woman. All the things that I can't talk. All the ways that is associated with being a woman while you have been in this process of transitioning into being a man. Like the amount of trauma that comes along with that, like, breaks my heart. And the idea that a trans man wouldn't be able to get abortive care if they were accidentally became pregnant. Like this person was under the impression that they couldn't, that wasn't even possible, that they were essentially sterile at this point because of their hormones, and they weren't. Something slipped through, and like that's so unjust to me.
In some states, life-saving medications are being denied people because they have abortive, I guess, like side effects. There's a case of a woman who couldn't get, I think it's diabetic medicine. It's a very common medicine used for a multitude of different things. And she could not get it at her pharmacy because it's abortive or whatever. So I think that is a whole nother consideration, is like that's a huge issue for trans rights, right? Because if you could take medication that would cause you to be sterile that might cause an abortion, can you get those medications?
Yeah.
If you're need to undergo chemotherapy and that could cause an abortion, can you do that? Like there's
Can you get a copper IUD?
Yes.
Because people consider that abortive.
Right.
I'm like, what about Accutane?
Right.
That's a huge one.
Yeah. There are many medications out there that are used for regular non-reproductive related things that could potentially cause an abortion. And they're not intentional, but are we going to ban those? Like, I don't know. I think it's
a scary thing.
It's very scary.
Because of the ripple effect throughout the medical world.
Yeah.
And how it will affect many, many people.
And then when you look at just our status as a country, we have one of the highest mortality rates, infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates in the industrialized, or I don't know, modernized world. And we have some of the lowest rates of paternity and maternity leave. And like, for example, I have maternity leave in my workplace, but very few people in my community do, because most workplaces just don't provide it. And so you have to take unpaid time to, like, there's like a myriad of reasons that the United States does not make it easy to have a child.
Or save up. A lot of people that I know have to save up disability and use
or you have to pay for
you
have to pay into disability and then
use it all.
When you're pregnant, when you have a baby.
You save up your sick time, your vacation time, and you just like
all of
bunch it together. And that's not
ethical.
Cool. That's not ethical.
Yeah, you're essentially docking people for having a baby.
Yeah. And that is why women and women's rights are such a central part to this issue, is that it's 9 months of your life growing a child, and just not even mentioning the medical side effects or effects that you might experience in that process. And then going through the most painful experience known to humankind, followed by like 9 months of body healing. And you're expected to just like not have financial problems and be able to like survive. You know, like, again, I'm in a very privileged place. I have maternity leave at my work. I have a good paycheck. I have a supportive, partner that would be able to support me in that. Like but if you don't have any of those things, like how the heck are you even supposed to like have a baby? Like having a baby could be like a $50,000 bill.
It is roughly that much in California.
So I don't know. I think people are like just very out of touch if they think that, oh, well, just too bad to figure it out.
Yeah. Well,
rant over.
So are you pro-choice or pro-life?
That is a great question. I'm pro-choice. I think the determination, the religious, ethical, moral considerations made into the personhood of an unborn fetus are too complicated to be defined by law pre-birth. And I think that women who are in those situations should have every right to make those choices, period.
I am also very pro-choice. I don't think it's my job to decide what you should or should not do. And I want the opportunity as well. I want everyone to have the opportunity. Like, there's a lot of implications in this, but I've really been like kind of thinking about like how I would define like forced motherhood. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of a modern day slavery of you have no right to what your body will or won't do. And I actually just can't get behind that. I don't think that there is a good reason to say you don't get to make this choice.
Yeah, I would put myself in the pro-choice camp as well. Similar to what Kellyanne said earlier, in an ideal world, we wouldn't need abortions. And I think that it is essential for us to be backing initiatives and legislation that provides true care to people that would result in lower abortion rates. But at the end of the day, abortion is healthcare.
Yeah. And I think that I know that a good majority of our audience is Christian or Christian deconstructing or somewhere on that spectrum.
About 80%.
And so
according to Instagram.
According to some polls that we've conducted. No. And so in that, I understand that there's a very real religious and moral implication to abortion. And I think generally well-intended. I don't think well-executed, but generally well-intended. And I think that I hope, if anything, this podcast is permission to think differently about abortion, even if you maintain your perspective, because we're not necessarily trying to change anyone's mind, but like, even if it's just to widen your understanding of the many various ways in which abortion can be considered based on religious, moral, political, ethical, etc. Points of view. And I mean, that's my thesis. There's so much more to it than I think the evangelical Christian perspective has given you. And it's safe and okay to consider what it would be like to think differently.
Totally. And here's my thing. If you do think differently, I think that's fine. But like, I want to work with you on things like making sure that kids get sexual education in school. I want to work with you on fixing the foster care system because it's a huge problem. I want to work with you. Like, there's so many things that I think like we can unite around to help solve the issue, to help solve the problem. But at the end of the day, I am still going to go protest with the abortion clinic at City Hall.
And we didn't even mention the fact that banning abortion doesn't reduce abortions.
Yeah.
Yep.
So on top of all of these like reasons and this like research that we've done, the experiences that we've had and that we've heard about, the fact of the matter is that passing anti-abortion legislation does not reduce the number of abortions. And if people truly, truly believe that a fetus is a life, that a fetus is a person, then they should not be backing anti-abortion measures. They should be backing all the other things that we mentioned.
That actually
reduce abortions, because statistically they have been proven to do that in other nations and in the United States. And so it's illogical to not allow women to have the choice to get an abortion or not.
If your goal.
Because the only thing that abortion bans do is create more unsafe abortions.
Right.
All that being said, we're very fired up. I hope this at the very least gives you an understanding to maybe like the depression and anger and sadness and et cetera that we felt and that lots of people were expressing after the decision was overturned. But we want to set you guys up with some resources that you can dig into the topic further, because please, by all means, do not take our rants and our ramblings as a full, complete picture or a perfect representation of all of the different ways that you can look at abortion. Especially like in terms of like ethics, in terms of religious liberty, like there's so much more to it than we are able to say or articulate in an episode. So
we're not professionals within the field.
Yes. So
in any way.
That is why further reading and watching recommendations are encouraged. So this is your moment, you guys, to share.
Well, obviously I would recommend A Complicated Choice by Katie Zay. That is a really good book about abortion from a Christian perspective, from a pro-choice Christian perspective. There's also in that realm, the Faith and Feminism podcast has been very pivotal to me in that sense as well. We've had Megan Shantz, who runs the Faith and Feminism podcast, on our podcast twice. She is great. And so she has a couple episodes that are pertaining to abortion. I would also recommend, maybe we can link specific episodes, but the Vox Today Explained podcast has some really powerful episodes about abortion. And
I'm just going to ditto that one because that was one of the ones I was going to say.
Yeah, sorry, stole it. There's some really good episodes. There's also a few really good YouTube videos that I would recommend that we can link down below that talk about. There's one that is an interview with a rabbi, a Muslim woman, and a Catholic woman about abortion, who are all pro-choice. That's really good. There's a couple other videos, but we can link them. Besides that, I think that's all that I have in terms of resources to recommend. There is a really good show that I can't remember the name of that is about abortion that I I don't know. Maybe I'll find it and we can link it down below. It's about abortion. It's with these Hispanic girls who are teenagers in the 1900s trying to get illegal abortions. And it's really good.
Great.
Unlike my co-hosts, I don't have a specific resource. I would recommend just literally getting on the internet and Googling. Like, I think you should be reading all kinds of stats that inform your decision for your belief and your stance on this issue. And I think if a woman is comfortable enough to tell you about her story and reveals to you that either she had an abortion or something of that nature, like, I think you should really listen to her, because that is actually a lot of what has informed my decision at this point, and belief and alignment is understanding the variety of reasons that women might get abortions and or need them. And I think really listening to women's stories is super important. So,
no, that's good. I don't have tons of reading recommendations. I actually kind of would recommend Unplanned by Abby Johnson. If you are still in a very much pro-life point of view, it's nice to gain compassion for where the pro-choice movement is coming from, at the very least. It's a very good, or opposite, if you are pro-choice, you kind of can see the perspective of the pro-life camp. I think what Kelly talked about in terms of like, what can we collaborate on? That's super important. And so I think having compassion for and understanding the opposite side of the argument is pretty essential. This isn't really a resource, but if you have the means and you have the time, I would recommend volunteering in some capacity, or working with women who need abortions in some capacity, whether that's your local Planned Parenthood or whatever. That is, I think, learn by doing. I think that was super valuable to my development, I guess. And then I was going to recommend Vox podcast. I also would recommend the Ezra Klein show. He interviewed a woman who studies abortion ethics and teaches it in universities. So that was very telling in terms of just ethical implications of abortion. And then also NPR has one that's I'm halfway through it, but that kind of goes into the politics of it. And potential implications of what this Supreme Court decision may entail. So we'll link those in the description of the podcast. But all of that being said, first of all, thank you all for listening. And for those of you that responded to our Instagram survey, that means a lot. We've loved seeing your engagement over the summer, and we will continue to throw questions your way. So keep it coming. And thank you, Emma and Kellyanne, for being with me today.
Thank you, Kelly. It was a joy.
It's the middle of the summer and we're on break, but this felt really important. So I'm really appreciative of you guys hopping in here and making it work. Yeah. So, So again, follow us on Instagram. That's @WomanBeingPodcast. You can check us out on YouTube. We're also on Spotify video. So if you like to watch videos, but you don't like YouTube, you can watch us on Spotify. And then we're on any other podcast platform that you might watch. And if we're not, I'd be surprised, but let us know. And
we'll do it.
We'll get on there.
Yeah, let us know.
And then lastly, you can check out our website, womanbeingcommunity.com. But again, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Stay safe.